Tonight, we are going to step into a world where breakfast did not exist, where lunch was not guaranteed, and where dinner was often nothing more than a hope carried into the dark. For most of human history, people did not wake up expecting food. There were no kitchens waiting in the morning, no markets around the corner, no clocks quietly telling the body when it was time to eat. There was only the landscape, the weather, the movement of animals, and the uncertain promise that somewhere, if luck and effort aligned, nourishment might be found. And that raises a strange question. If the human body was shaped in a world where food came and went unpredictably, what does it mean that we now eat every single day, often at the exact same hours, often without even thinking about it? Tonight, we are not approaching this as modern diet advice, and we are not trying to romanticize hunger. Instead, we are traveling deep into human history to understand a quieter truth, that for most of our species' existence, irregular eating was not unusual at all. It was simply life. So dim the lights, settle in, and let your mind wander back to a much older Earth, where survival moved not to the rhythm of the clock, but to the rhythm of the land itself. For most of the time humans have existed, eating was not something that happened because the hour said it should. It happened because food was found. Long before farms, kitchens, or village markets, early humans moved through landscapes that offered nourishment only in uncertain bursts. Across the plains, woodlands, riverbanks, and rocky valleys of the ancient world, food was not scheduled. It was encountered. Some days brought fruit, roots, shellfish, or small animals. Other days brought very little at all. To us, this can feel difficult to imagine because modern life is built around predictability. We expect food to appear, but for our ancestors, that expectation would have made very little sense. There was no breakfast waiting after sunrise, no midday meal guaranteed by routine, no evening certainty that hunger would be answered before nightfall. The human body was shaped in this older reality. During the long span of the Pleistocene, which covers nearly all of Homo sapiens' evolutionary history, people lived in small mobile groups. They followed game, searched for edible plants, watched the weather, and adjusted constantly to changing conditions. Herds migrated unpredictably. Fruits ripened and vanished. Rivers shifted. Seasons transformed entire regions. In that world, hunger was not always a crisis. Often, it was simply part of the pattern. A successful hunt might provide energy for days. A failed one might leave a group relying on marrow, roots, insects, or whatever else the land could offer. Food arrived in pulses, not in a smooth daily stream. And because of that, the body did not evolve around constant intake. It evolved around flexibility. This is the first quiet truth of our story. Humans were not shaped in a world of daily meals. We were shaped in a world of opportunity and of waiting. And in that older world, the body learned something modern life often forgets. It learned how to endure the spaces between. If we slow down even further, beyond the idea of a single missed meal or a failed hunt, we begin to see how deeply uncertainty was woven into early human life. For small bands of hunter-gatherers, survival depended on reading the landscape with extraordinary care. Water sources could dry. Herds could move elsewhere. Plant growth could fail after a poor season. Even familiar land could become temporarily barren. There was no fixed guarantee that today's effort would produce today's food. This meant that eating every single day was often not biologically realistic. Archaeological evidence gives us only fragments of this world, but the fragments are revealing. At many Paleolithic sites, animal bones appear in concentrated clusters, suggesting episodes of abundance, moments when a large carcass was brought back and processed thoroughly. But between such moments, the record often grows quieter. Fewer remains, fewer signs of concentrated nourishment. This does not mean early humans were always starving. It means that access to energy naturally rose and fell. That rise and fall was not a failure of the system. It was the system. Even in the warmer African environments where early humans first evolved, food availability changed with rainfall, season, and migration. Fruits appeared and disappeared. Tubers required time and effort. Small prey was unreliable. The idea that a person would consume substantial calories every 24 hours without interruption would have been foreign for much of human history. What mattered was not rigid consistency. What mattered was adaptability, the ability to eat when food appeared, and to continue functioning when it did not. That adaptability shaped more than metabolism. It shaped behavior itself. Hunger encouraged movement, cooperation, memory, and innovation. It pushed people to learn migration routes, to craft better tools, to read the signs of weather and terrain with astonishing precision. In a world without abundance, command, hunger was not only discomfort, it was direction. And so, the body that emerged from this long, uncertain history became a body that did not expect certainty. It became a body built not for endless supply, but for survival within fluctuation. Across tens of thousands of years, the human day did not revolve around meals. It revolved around movement. Early humans did not wake into a world that promised provision. The morning sun rose over plains where animals might or might not appear, over forests where fruiting trees could be full 1 month and empty the next, over rivers that sometimes offered fish and sometimes offered nothing at all. In such landscapes, the structure of the day was built around seeking, not consuming. Eating was the result of success. It was not the starting assumption. Anthropologists studying more recent hunter-gatherer groups, though never perfect mirrors of Paleolithic life, have repeatedly observed this same rhythm. Some days yield substantial food, other days produce very little. Over time, things may balance out, but on any given day, intake can remain unpredictable. And this matters deeply, because from the perspective of natural selection, the human body did not need a guarantee of daily food. It needed the ability to maintain function across longer spans of uncertainty. That is a very different kind of design. The body had to be capable of storing energy when food was present, and then drawing from those reserves when it was absent. It had to stay alert during hunger. It had to keep moving through the world without collapsing the moment nourishment was delayed. Even the brain reflects this older pattern. If mild hunger immediately destroyed concentration or decision-making, early humans would have been at a severe disadvantage. A hungry mind still needed to track prey, recognize danger, remember water sources, and cooperate with others. In that sense, the nervous system was not built to panic at the first missed opportunity to eat. It was built to endure. And this is one of the most striking contrasts with the modern world. Today, eating often structures the day itself. Breakfast, lunch, dinner. A sequence, a rhythm imposed by clocks, work schedules, and routine. But for most of human history, the day belonged first to the landscape. Food came later, if it came at all, and the body learned to live inside that uncertainty. Today, hunger is often treated like an emergency, a slight emptiness in the stomach, a drop in comfort, a wave of appetite. And immediately, the modern world tells us something must be wrong. that the feeling should be corrected as quickly as possible. But in evolutionary terms, hunger was never simply a warning light. It was communication. For early humans, hunger was not proof that the system was failing. It was part of the system itself. It was a signal designed to motivate action in environments where food could not be relied upon with perfect regularity. And this is where the body becomes even more fascinating. One of the key hormones involved in hunger is ghrelin, often called the hunger hormone. Ghrelin tends to rise before eating and fall afterward. But what is important is this: ghrelin does not always rise because the body is in danger. It often rises because the body anticipates food. That means hunger is not just biology. It is rhythm, memory, expectation. In the modern world, this can mean feeling hungry at the usual lunch hour, even when the body still has plenty of available energy. The signal is real, but it does not necessarily mean crisis. That flexibility would have been incredibly useful in ancient life. The body needed to encourage searching behavior when food was needed, but it also needed to remain functional when food did not immediately appear. Hunger, in that context, was not meant to shut a person down. It was meant to sharpen awareness and encourage movement. This does not mean starvation was harmless. Of course it was not. But short intervals without food were not unusual. They were expected, and the body reflects that expectation. When our ancestors felt hunger, they were not necessarily receiving a message that said something is wrong. Often, the message was much simpler. Keep going. Keep watching the land. Keep moving. Keep searching. In that sense, hunger was never just discomfort. It was an ancient survival language, spoken quietly by the body to help guide a species through a world where certainty did not exist. One of the quietest miracles of the human body is that it was never built to run on only one condition. It was built to adapt. When early humans found food, the body stored what it could. When food did not appear, the body did not simply fail. It shifted. It changed gears. It moved from one internal strategy to another with a calm precision shaped over hundreds of thousands of years. This is one of the clearest signs that humans were never formed around the assumption of constant daily eating. After a meal, the body uses incoming glucose for immediate energy and stores some of the excess as glycogen in the liver and muscles. But glycogen is only a short-term reserve. It can help bridge the first stretch without food, but it does not last forever. And that is where the deeper design appears. When intake pauses, the body gradually begins to draw more heavily on stored fat. This is not a modern dietary trick. It is not a recent health trend. It is ancient physiology. It reflects a body that evolved in landscapes where nourishment came in waves, not in a smooth, uninterrupted stream. This ability to move between fuel sources, from food recently eaten to energy already stored, would have been essential for survival. A hunting party returning empty-handed still needed to walk. A mother gathering roots still needed strength. A group tracking migrating animals still needed alertness. Without fuel flexibility, none of that would have been possible. And so, the human body became a body of transitions. It learned to feast when the land allowed it, and to endure when the land withheld. That flexibility still lives inside us now, though modern life rarely asks us to notice it. We often imagine the body as something fragile, constantly dependent on immediate intake. But in truth, much of our physiology was shaped by the opposite condition. Not constant feeding, but pauses. And in those pauses, the body was never empty. It was simply drawing from a different chapter of its own. Stored history, If hunger truly made humans weak in every sense, our species would likely never have survived. That may sound simple, but it carries enormous meaning, because survival in ancient environments required a brain that could continue working even when food was absent. A hungry person still needed to observe tracks in the dirt, remember where water could be found, recognize danger in the movement of grass, and make decisions that might mean the difference between life and death. A mind that shut down too quickly under mild scarcity would not have lasted long, and so the human brain, despite being energy hungry, evolved within a body that could support it through uncertainty. This is one of the most overlooked parts of the story. We often assume that if food is delayed, mental clarity must disappear immediately. But early humans lived in worlds where waiting was unavoidable. If cognition collapsed after a few hours without eating, then searching for food would become nearly impossible. Instead, the nervous system appears to have developed a remarkable tolerance for temporary absence. That does not mean severe deprivation was safe. It was not. Prolonged starvation is deeply harmful, but shorter, recurring intervals without food were likely common enough that the body had to remain functional through them. And perhaps that is why mild hunger often comes in waves, rather than as one steady climb toward collapse. It rises, then softens, then rises again, almost as if the body is not issuing a final warning, but a repeated reminder, a nudge, a signal to stay engaged with the world. For our ancestors, this would have mattered enormously. Hunger needed to motivate continued effort, not immediate surrender. It had to sharpen the senses just enough to keep movement possible, to keep searching possible, to keep survival possible. And so the brain, like the body beneath it, was shaped not for uninterrupted supply, but for resilience between moments of nourishment. A quiet resilience, the kind that allowed human beings to keep thinking, keep walking, and keep enduring beneath open skies, even when no meal had yet appeared, long before written history, before language was recorded, before memory could be passed down in words. The story of human life was left behind in quieter ways, in stone tools, in hearths, in fractured bones scattered across ancient campsites. And within those traces something subtle begins to appear, a pattern. Archaeologists studying Paleolithic sites often find clusters of animal remains that suggest moments of intense activity. A large animal brought down, bones carefully cut, broken open for marrow, even the skull cracked to reach nutrient-rich tissues. These were not casual meals, they were events, moments when the land had offered abundance. But between these clusters, the record often becomes thinner, fewer remains, less evidence of concentrated eating, not because humans disappeared, but because food did not arrive in the same way every day. What we see, again and again, is not a steady line of daily consumption. We see pulses, a successful hunt, followed by quieter periods, a season of gathering, followed by scarcity. Even the way bones were processed tells a story. The thorough extraction of marrow, the careful use of every part of an animal, suggests something important. When food was secured, it mattered. It was not taken lightly. It was not assumed that another meal would arrive tomorrow in the same way. This is not the behavior of a species living with constant supply. It is the behavior of a species adapted to uncertainty. Across Africa, Europe, and Asia, these patterns repeat. Sites show signs of repeated occupation, but rarely of continuous, evenly distributed food remains that would suggest predictable daily intake. Instead, they reflect adaptation, movement, and response to changing conditions. The stones and bones do not speak directly, But if we listen carefully, they tell us this: human life was not built around guaranteed meals. It was built around opportunity and the ability to endure between those opportunities. If we widen our perspective even further, beyond individual days or hunts, another pattern begins to emerge. Food was not only unpredictable from day to day, it changed across entire seasons. In many of the environments early humans inhabited, the year itself shaped what could be eaten, when it could be found, and how long it would last. Fruits appeared briefly, then vanished. Herds moved through regions in specific months, then disappeared across vast distances. Rivers swelled with fish during certain periods and grew quiet in others. The rhythm of eating was not daily, it was seasonal. During times of abundance, a group might eat well. Energy would be available. Bodies could store what they needed. But during leaner periods, intake would naturally decline. Not by choice, but because the environment demanded it. And this is where the body's deeper design begins to make even more sense. The ability to store energy as fat, the ability to slowly release that energy over time, the ability to remain functional even when intake decreased. All of these features align perfectly with a world where food rises and falls across months, not hours. In colder regions, winters reduced plant availability and altered animal movement. In drier climates, rainfall determined whether landscapes flourished or faded. Across all of these environments, the same principle held true. Food came in waves, and humans adapted to those waves. Even today, traces of this seasonal pattern can still be seen in traditional societies that live closer to the land. Intake varies, activity shifts, the body responds, but in the modern world, something has changed. The seasons no longer control our access to food. Supermarkets are full in winter and summer alike. Fruits arrive from distant continents. Meat is available every day. The natural rise and fall has been flattened into something constant. And yet, beneath that constant surface, the body remains what it has always been. A system shaped not by daily certainty, but by long cycles of abundance and restraint. If food does not come every day, the body must prepare for that reality. And over hundreds of thousands of years, that is exactly what it learned to do. One of the most defining features of human physiology is not how quickly it burns energy, but how carefully it saves it. The ability to store surplus energy as fat is often misunderstood today. It is sometimes seen as a flaw, something modern life struggles against. But in the world where humans evolved, it was protection. When a hunt succeeded, or a landscape offered abundance, the body did not assume this would continue. It responded conservatively. It stored. It held onto what it could, because across evolutionary time, abundance was rarely permanent. It came, and then it passed. Fat tissue, in that context, was not excess, it was insurance, a reserve that could sustain movement, thought, and survival when food was not immediately available. Individuals who could store energy efficiently had a clear advantage. When the next hunt failed, when the dry season arrived, when the land offered less, their bodies could continue. This is the quiet logic written into our biology. The body does not behave as if food will always be there tomorrow. It behaves as if tomorrow is uncertain. Even today, this ancient assumption is still visible. The body stores energy readily when intake exceeds immediate needs. But when food intake drops, it does not release those reserves recklessly. It does so gradually, carefully, as if guarding against a future it cannot predict. This pattern only makes sense in one kind of world, a world where meals were not guaranteed. And so, When we ask why humans were never designed to eat every day, part of the answer lies here, in this instinct to save, in this quiet biological caution, in a system that learned over countless generations that survival belongs not to those who consume constantly, but to those who prepare for absence. If storing energy tells us part of the story, the way the body releases that energy tells us even more. Because the human body does not empty its reserves all at once, it releases them slowly, in stages, with remarkable precision. When food intake pauses, the body first turns to glycogen, the short-term energy stored in the liver. This supply can maintain stability for a time, allowing the body to continue functioning without immediate intake. But glycogen is limited, and when it begins to run low, something deeper begins to happen. The body shifts, hormonal signals adjust, stored fat is gradually mobilized, fatty acids begin to circulate, providing fuel for muscles and other tissues. Over longer periods, even the brain can begin to draw from alternative energy sources. This transition is not chaotic, it is controlled. And that control tells us something important. It tells us that the body expects this to happen. This is not an emergency system designed for rare disasters. It is a regular, built-in response to the absence of food. A system shaped by countless generations who lived through natural gaps between meals. Even muscle tissue, which we might expect to break down quickly, is protected in the early stages. The body preserves what it can, as if anticipating that nourishment will return. And in most ancestral situations, it would. This entire sequence, from glycogen to fat, from immediate fuel to long-term reserves, reflects a body that was built to bridge time, to move from one moment of eating to the next, even when those moments were separated by uncertainty, not hours defined by a clock, but time defined by the land. And perhaps that is the most revealing detail of all. The human body does not behave like a system that requires constant input. It behaves like a system that expects interruption and knows how to survive it. Today, the word fasting often sounds intentional. It brings to mind religion, discipline, or modern health culture. It sounds like a choice, a deliberate pause from eating for a reason. But for most of human history, fasting was not a practice. It was simply life. Early humans did not decide to skip breakfast because they were following a method. They went without food because food had not yet been found, because the hunt had failed, because the roots were scarce, because the herd had moved elsewhere, because the landscape for that moment offered nothing. These natural intervals without eating were not rare interruptions in human life. They were built into it. That is one of the most important distinctions in this entire story. Our ancestors were not fasting in the modern sense. They were existing inside an environment where food naturally ebbed and flowed. Some days brought plenty, others brought very little. The body did not treat this rhythm as a malfunction. It treated it as normal. And over time, physiology adapted accordingly. This is why so many of the body's deeper systems seem prepared for interruption. Hunger hormones rise and fall. Stored energy is mobilized gradually. Mental function often remains stable through moderate gaps in intake. None of this would make sense if the human organism had truly evolved under the assumption of guaranteed daily meals. But it did not. It evolved in a world where eating was an event, not a routine. That does not mean prolonged deprivation was harmless. Of course not. Severe starvation has always been dangerous, but short and moderate intervals without food were likely common enough to shape the species itself. In that sense, what we now call fasting was once simply the background condition of being human. Not a trend, not a ritual, not a challenge, just the ordinary silence between opportunities to eat. And the body, shaped by those silences, still remembers them. There is another side to this ancient rhythm that is easy to overlook. If early humans regularly experienced natural gaps without food, then the body needed more than just fuel reserves. It needed behavior that could continue through those gaps. In other words, hunger could not simply be a command to stop. It had to become a signal to act. Imagine a small group moving across dry land under an open sky. No food yet, no certainty ahead. If mild hunger immediately made them lethargic, unfocused, or unable to continue, survival would become almost impossible. They still needed to walk, search, observe, remember, and decide. So the human nervous system appears to have evolved with a remarkable tolerance for moderate hunger, not because hunger was pleasant, but because life demanded function in its presence. This is why hunger often comes in waves. It rises, peaks, softens, then returns. That pattern suggests something deeply ancient. The body is not simply counting down to collapse. It is sending a recurring message, a nudge, a reminder, keep searching. This would have been adaptive in ancestral environments. A body that remained capable during temporary food absence had a better chance of securing future nourishment. The sensation of hunger needed to motivate movement, not erase it. And perhaps that is why mild hunger can sometimes sharpen awareness rather than destroy it. In evolutionary terms, that would make perfect sense. A species that depended on tracking prey, locating edible plants, and reading the land needed alertness most precisely when food had not yet been found. Hunger, then, wasn't only a biological sensation, it was direction. A quiet push toward action, a signal that said the body still believed survival was possible, and that the next opportunity might still be waiting just over the next ridge, beyond the next river, or beneath the next patch of earth. One of the reasons humans could live in a world of irregular food is that they rarely faced that world entirely alone. Early humans survived in groups. Small bands of people moved together across landscapes, and within those groups, food was not always kept by the one who found it. A successful hunt could bring down more meat than one person could consume before it spoiled. Gathered foods could be shared. Marrow, organs, roots, shellfish, all of it could pass through many hands. This mattered deeply, because while the environment was uncertain, social life helped soften that uncertainty. If one individual failed to find food on a given day, another might succeed. If a hunting party returned with a large carcass, the calories could be distributed across the group. This did not eliminate fluctuation, but it helped reduce its sharpest edges. In a sense, humans evolved not only to tolerate irregular eating biologically, but to buffer it socially. That is a very powerful idea. It means the human relationship to food was never purely individual. It was woven into trust, cooperation, memory, and obligation. Survival often depended not only on what you found, but on what we shared. And yet, even this system did not create perfect consistency. Food still arrived in pulses. A successful day might be followed by a lean one. Sharing could smooth the pattern, but it could not erase the larger truth. The land still determined the rhythm. What sharing did was make irregularity more survivable. It turned uncertainty into something the group could carry together. And perhaps this is part of why the human species became so socially complex. Cooperation around food was not a side feature of survival. It was survival. The ability to endure uneven access depended not only on the body's internal reserves, but on the willingness of people to support one another through the spaces between abundance So no. Early humans were not simply hungry individuals wandering a hostile world. They were communities learning how to endure uncertainty together. And that may have changed everything. Once we begin to see food as something shared rather than merely consumed, another layer of the story appears. Food was not only calories, it was relationship. Within small hunter-gatherer groups, sharing was not just practical, it was social glue. A large animal, once hunted, could become more than nourishment. It became a moment of gathering, a temporary relief, a reaffirmation that the group could survive another stretch of uncertainty. In this way, eating itself may have been deeply emotional long before it was ever scheduled. When food was available, it was not simply eaten and forgotten. It could strengthen bonds, reinforce trust, and remind each person that survival depended on others as much as on themselves. And this matters because it changes how we understand irregular eating. It was not always a lonely experience. Lean periods were often shared. Hunger, too, was communal. If food had not been found, it was not one person privately failing in the modern sense. It was the group living inside the reality of the landscape. That shared understanding likely reduced the psychological burden of short-term scarcity. Everyone was inside the same rhythm. Everyone knew that some days would be full and others would not. This collective resilience may help explain why humans could tolerate fluctuation so well. The body managed the biological side, but the group helped to manage the emotional and practical side. Children were fed through adult effort. Elders survived through communal care. Stronger members supported weaker ones, not because life was always generous, but because it often was not. And over time, this may have shaped something profound. The ability to remain calm, cooperative, and socially stable even when food was not immediate may have become one of the most valuable human traits of all. Because in a fluctuating world, panic helps very little, but patience, memory, and trust, those can carry a people through lean seasons. And perhaps that is why the human story is not only the story of hunger, it is also the story of how we learn to endure hunger together. For most of human history, food was something encountered. Then very slowly, in a few different places on Earth, humans began to do something extraordinary. They started trying to shape it. Seeds were planted, animals were kept. Land was worked not only for shelter or movement, but for future nourishment. This was the beginning of agriculture, and with it came one of the most important transformations in the human relationship to food. For hundreds of thousands of years, intake had followed the movement of prey, the ripening of plants, the rise and fall of seasons. But with cultivation came a new possibility: predictability. Not perfect predictability, not safety in every year or every place, but enough of it to begin changing expectations. When crops could be grown and harvested, food was no longer only found, it could be prepared for, planned for, stored for later. That single shift changed far more than diet. It began to change time itself, because once food could be grown intentionally, life no longer had to move entirely with the wild rhythms of the landscape. Humans could stay, villages formed, fields mattered, harvests mattered. The land was no longer only something crossed, it became something managed, and slowly, the idea of food as a recurring certainty began to grow. This did not happen overnight. Early agriculture was still vulnerable to drought, flood, pests, and failure. But compared to the deep uncertainty of Paleolithic life, it represented something radically new, a move away from pure opportunity and toward expectation. that expectation would eventually become so normal that we now barely notice it. But in evolutionary terms, it is recent. The body had already been shaped by an immense stretch of time before agriculture ever appeared, which means that while farming changed the environment around humans, it did not instantly rewrite the biology within them. And that is where the tension begins, because from this point forward, culture would begin moving toward regular meals. While the body beneath that culture remained much older, agriculture did not only change what people ate, it changed when they ate. Once humans began settling into farming life, time itself became more structured. Fields had to be tended, animals needed care, water systems had to be maintained. Daily labor became more regular, and as labor became more regular, food slowly began to follow the same pattern. Meals became woven into the day. Morning nourishment before work. Food during pauses in labor. Evening meals after the tasks were done. This was very different from the older world of hunter-gatherers, where eating was often tied to success, chance, and the shifting generosity of the land. Farming introduced something new: repetition. And with repetition came expectation. Children born into farming communities grew up inside a different rhythm than their distant ancestors. Food might still be scarce at times, but the idea of regular nourishment became more familiar. Daily eating slowly became part of social order. But here is the important part. Culture was changing faster than biology. The body did not suddenly become a machine that required clock-based feeding just because humans began planting grain. The deeper metabolic systems, storing energy, releasing it gradually, tolerating temporary gaps, remained largely the same. They had been shaped over a far longer period than agriculture had existed. So even as daily meals became more common, the ancient body underneath them did not disappear. It simply adapted as best it could. And this is one of the most fascinating truths in the entire story. Human life changed dramatically with agriculture, but the human organism remained in many ways a creature of an older world, a world of interrupted access, a world of cycles, a world where food was still, at its deepest level, never fully guaranteed. The farms changed the schedule, but they did not erase the memory written into the body. That memory remained, quiet, ancient, and still present beneath every structured meal that would come after. Once food could be grown, harvested, and stored, something subtle but profound began to happen. Eating slowly shifted from being an event into being an expectation. This did not happen all at once. For a very long time, even farming communities still lived with uncertainty. Harvests could fail, crops could rot, seasons could turn harsh without warning. But compared to the deep unpredictability of foraging life, agriculture introduced a new psychological world. A world where tomorrow's food could sometimes be imagined in advance. And that changed everything. When grain could be stored in clay vessels or communal granaries, food no longer had to vanish the moment it was found. It could remain. It could wait. It could be portioned out over time. This gave rise to a new relationship with nourishment, one less dependent on immediate success and more dependent on planning. From this shift, the daily meal slowly emerged, not as a biological necessity discovered by the body, but as a cultural habit made possible by storage and settlement. That distinction matters, because by this point in history, humans had already lived for the overwhelming majority of their existence without regular guaranteed meals. The body was ancient. The routine was new. Still, routines are powerful things. Once a society begins expecting food at certain times, those expectations become woven into memory, family life, labor, ritual, and identity. Eating becomes more than nourishment. It becomes structure. It becomes normal. And over generations, what was once unusual begins to feel obvious. This is how the daily meal was born, not in the deep past of human evolution, but much later, when storage and settlement allowed certainty to slowly replace chance. And yet, beneath that new certainty, the older body remained. A body still shaped by irregularity. A body that had not been formed by routine, but only taught to live inside it. As daily meals became more common, another change quietly followed. Hunger itself began to mean something different. In the older world of hunting and gathering, hunger was woven into life. It was not pleasant, but it was familiar. It did not automatically signal that something had gone wrong. It often simply meant that food had not yet been found. But in settled agricultural societies, where food could increasingly be stored and distributed, hunger slowly began to feel less like a natural interval and more like a problem. Something to avoid, something to solve, something that suggested instability. This was a major shift in human experience. Once people began expecting meals at regular times, the absence of those meals changed psychologically. What had once been normal fluctuation became, more and more, a disruption. And over centuries, that expectation deepened until many societies began organizing entire days around the prevention of hunger. This is where the modern mind begins to take shape, a mind that often interprets hunger not as a passing signal, but as a warning, a discomfort that should be corrected quickly, a sign that something is off. And yet, biologically, the body beneath that feeling was still carrying the ancient systems of a much older world. It still knew how to switch fuels. It still knew how to release stored energy. It still knew how to remain functional through temporary gaps. The culture had changed faster than the organism. And this created a quiet contradiction that still exists today. We live in a world where regular eating feels normal and often necessary, while inhabiting bodies that were originally shaped in environments where regular eating was often impossible. This does not mean one world is right and the other is wrong. It simply means they are different. And to understand the human relationship with food, we have to hold both truths at once. The modern expectation of regular meals and the ancient body that was never fully built around them. For a very long time, even after agriculture, food was still tied to the natural world. Harvests came when the season allowed them. Certain foods appeared only in certain months. Winter reduced variety. Drought changed entire communities. Even farming had not fully defeated uncertainty, but eventually, another transformation arrived: industry. And with it, food began to drift further and further away from the rhythms that had shaped human life for millennia. Mechanized farming increased output. Preservation methods improved. Food could be dried, canned, transported, packaged, and eventually refrigerated on a scale the ancient world could never have imagined. Suddenly, nourishment no longer needed to appear only when the local environment allowed it. It could arrive from somewhere else, a fruit from a distant climate, grain stored for months, meat preserved beyond the season of slaughter. For the first time in human history, in many parts of the world, the natural rise and fall of food availability began to flatten. This was an astonishing change, because for hundreds of thousands of years, the body had been shaped in environments where seasons mattered deeply. Abundance had a time, scarcity had a time, The body stored when food was available because it knew, in a sense, that the landscape would eventually withhold again. But industrial life softened those edges. Food no longer disappeared with winter in the same way. It no longer depended entirely on local rainfall, local migration, or local harvest cycles. The old ecological pauses began to fade, and with them the experience of natural fluctuation faded too. What emerged instead was something much newer: the possibility of eating every day, regardless of what the land outside was doing. That would have been nearly unimaginable to most of our ancestors. And yet once again, the body remained older than the world around it, still shaped by cycles, still built for fluctuation, still carrying instincts, formed in seasons that modern life had begun to erase. As food became more available, another pattern slowly hardened into something familiar. 3 meals a day: breakfast, lunch, dinner. Today, this rhythm feels almost natural. It is so deeply woven into modern life that many people rarely stop to ask where it came from. But this structure is not ancient in the evolutionary sense. It is cultural, historical, built gradually through agriculture, labor systems, and later industrial life. Factories helped solidify it. When work became organized by the clock, food followed the clock. Workers ate before shifts, during breaks, and after labor ended. Meals became scheduled not around the unpredictability of nature, but around the predictability of human systems. And this had enormous consequences, because now eating was no longer simply a response to opportunity or even to hunger. It became part of the timetable of civilization. The modern day was divided not only by work and sleep, but by expected moments of nourishment. This would have been profoundly unfamiliar to early humans, not because they never ate multiple times in a day, certainly they sometimes did, but because the expectation itself would have been foreign. Their relationship with food was based on encounter, not routine, on timing shaped by the land, not by the hour hand of a clock. And yet, once 3 meals a day became normalized, they began to feel self-evident. Parents passed the pattern to children. Schools reinforced it. Workplaces depended on it. Entire societies came to treat this arrangement as if it was simply how humans eat. But the deeper truth is more complicated. The human organism did not emerge from evolution with breakfast, lunch, and dinner built into its biology. Those are cultural structures layered upon a much older body, a body that can live within routine. Yes, but a body that was originally shaped in a world where routine feeding was often impossible. And that distinction is the quiet heart of this entire story. At first, modern life gave people regular meals, but eventually it gave something even stranger: food without boundaries. In earlier societies, even when breakfast, lunch, and dinner became common, there were still natural pauses between them. Preparing food took time. Ingredients were limited. Eating was an event with a beginning and an end. But in the industrial and post-industrial world, those boundaries began to dissolve. Packaged food changed everything. Suddenly, nourishment no longer required cooking, gathering, or waiting. It could be opened instantly, carried in a pocket, bought at any hour, eaten while walking, driving, working, or doing almost nothing at all. For most of human history, this would have been unrecognizable. The ancient human body evolved in a world where obtaining food usually required effort, time, and uncertainty. But now, in many places, food can appear almost without friction. It waits on shelves, in vending machines, in drawers, in kitchens, in shops, open late into the night. And this changes more than convenience. It changes the rhythm of the body's relationship with nourishment. Because once food is always available, the natural pauses that once shaped human metabolism begin to vanish. The older cycles of searching, finding, storing, and waiting become less visible. Instead, the modern environment offers a nearly continuous stream of opportunity to eat. This is not a small historical change. It is one of the most dramatic environmental shifts our species has ever experienced. And yet, the body did not evolve under these conditions. Its systems for hunger, storage, and fuel switching were formed in landscapes where access came in pulses, where effort usually came before reward, where the absence of food was not unusual. So when meals stop being the boundary, something profound happens. The ancient rhythm begins to blur, and beneath the surface of convenience, the body is left navigating a world it was never fully prepared to inherit. One of the quietest losses of modern life may be this: the disappearance of natural hunger pauses. For most of a human history, the body experienced intervals between nourishment as a normal part of life. These pauses were not necessarily long or dramatic, but they were real. Time passed between opportunities to eat. Hunger had room to rise, settle, and rise again. The body had room to shift internally, to move from incoming fuel towards stored reserves. That pattern was ancient, but modern abundance has changed it. When food is available almost everywhere, hunger often has very little time to unfold. A sensation begins, and before the body can move fully into its older adaptive rhythm, the signal is answered. A snack, a drink, a bite, something quick and easy. The pause ends almost before it begins. This creates a very different kind of human experience. In ancestral life, the body had repeated contact with temporary absence. It knew what it meant to function through mild uncertainty. But in the modern world, that uncertainty is increasingly removed. The space between meals shrinks. The silence between signals disappears. And over time, this changes perception. Hunger begins to feel more unfamiliar, more uncomfortable, more urgent, not necessarily because the body has become weaker, but because the environment no longer asks it to practice what it once knew well. This is an important distinction. The body still carries the ancient capacity to endure those pauses, but culture and convenience have reduced how often that capacity is called upon. And so we arrive at a strange modern condition. Humans now inhabit bodies built for fluctuation, while living inside systems designed to eliminate fluctuation almost entirely. The result is not simply a change in diet. It is a change in rhythm, a shift away from the older cadence of human life, where the body moved through hunger, not as a crisis, but as a familiar phase in the long and uneven flow of survival. When we place the ancient human body inside the modern food environment, something important becomes visible. The body is not malfunctioning. It is behaving exactly as it was shaped to behave. That may be one of the most important truths in this entire story. The human organism evolved in a world where food appeared in waves. When nourishment arrived, the body responded intelligently. It absorbed energy. It stored what was not immediately needed. It prepared for the possibility that scarcity would return. And for most of human history, that response was wise, because scarcity usually did return. But in the modern world, especially in places where food is constantly available, the expected lean period often never fully comes. The body still follows its ancient logic. It still stores. It still conserves. It still acts as though tomorrow may be uncertain. Only now, tomorrow often brings more food, and then more after that. This creates a quiet mismatch, not because the body is broken, But because the environment has changed faster than biology ever could, natural selection shaped human metabolism across hundreds of thousands of years. By contrast, the world of supermarkets, packaged snacks, year-round abundance, and constant access is astonishingly new. The body has not had enough evolutionary time to become something fundamentally different. So beneath the routines of modern life, we still carry an organism that expects interruption. An organism that was built to oscillate between intake and absence. That oscillation once made perfect sense. Today, in many parts of the world, it is often interrupted by abundance before it can fully unfold. And perhaps that is one of the clearest ways to understand the question we began with. Humans were never truly designed to eat every day in the modern sense, because the body was shaped for a world in which every day could never be assumed. One of the most misunderstood features of the human body is how quickly and efficiently it stores excess energy. To the modern mind, this can seem frustrating, even unfair. Why does the body hold on so tightly? Why does it save so much? Why does it behave as though abundance might suddenly disappear? The answer is ancient, because for most of human history, abundance did disappear. The body stores energy easily because storing energy once increased the odds of survival. In environments shaped by irregular access, a successful hunt or a rich gathering day might provide more calories than were immediately needed. The wise biological response was not to waste that opportunity. It was to save it. Hormones such as insulin help direct this process. When food is eaten, especially carbohydrate-rich food, insulin rises and helps move nutrients into storage. In a world where food pulses were temporary, this was not a flaw. It was an elegant solution to uncertainty. Store now, because later is unknown. That instruction still lives inside us. And this is where modern life creates tension. Because when food is no longer occasional abundance, but near constant abundance, the same systems keep doing what they have always done. They store, they conserve, they prepare. The body does not automatically know that a refrigerator is full or that a store is open nearby. It responds not to modern convenience, but to ancient signals. And this helps explain something very important. The body's tendency to save energy is not evidence of poor design. It is evidence of historical design, a design shaped in landscapes where preparation for absence was far wiser than trust in permanence. So when we ask why humans were never designed to eat every day, part of the answer lies here. Because the body was not built to assume endless supply. It was built to survive the loss of it. There is one final piece to understand. Not just the body, but the mind. Because the human brain did not evolve in a world where food was everywhere. It evolved in a world where food had to be earned, found, tracked, reached. And because of that, the brain developed powerful reward systems to reinforce success. When early humans secured food, especially after effort or uncertainty, the brain responded strongly. It released signals that encouraged that behavior to be repeated. This was not indulgence, it was survival. It helped humans remember what worked and return to it again. But there was a balance. Effort came first, reward came after. In the modern world, that sequence is often reversed. Food appears without effort. High-calorie, highly palatable foods can be accessed instantly. The same reward systems that once reinforced rare success are now activated frequently, sometimes continuously. This is not because the brain is flawed. It is because the environment has changed. The ancient brain still responds as if each opportunity for rich food matters. It does not distinguish between a rare event in a harsh landscape and a snack taken from a shelf within arm's reach. The signals are the same. The context is different. And so the brain, like the body, continues to follow patterns shaped in another world. A world where effort, scarcity, and reward were deeply connected. Today, that connection has been loosened, but the system remains. If we step back from everything we have explored, a quiet pattern begins to emerge. The human body was never built around certainty. It was built around rhythm, a rhythm of finding and not finding, of eating and waiting, of storing and releasing, of effort and reward. For most of human history, this rhythm unfolded naturally. It was shaped by seasons, landscapes, migration, and cooperation. No one needed to design it. No one needed to enforce it. It simply existed as part of life itself. But over time, humans changed the world around them. Agriculture brought structure. Industry brought abundance. Modern life brought constant access. And slowly, the older rhythm faded into the background. Not because it disappeared, but because it was no longer required. Yet the body did not forget. It still carries the imprint of that ancient pattern, in the way it stores energy, in the way hunger rises and falls, in the way it can function through temporary absence, in the way it expects cycles even when the environment offers constancy. And this leads us back to the question we began with. Why were humans never designed to eat every day? Not because eating every day is wrong, but because for most of our existence, it was never guaranteed. The body did not evolve around daily certainty. It evolved around possibility. And perhaps in the quiet moments between meals, in the brief spaces where hunger appears and then softens again, there is still a faint echo of that older world. A world where life moved more slowly, more uncertainly, but also more closely aligned with the deeper rhythm that shaped us. If you made it this far, you've just traveled through hundreds of thousands of years of human history without ever leaving your bed. And maybe, as you drift off tonight, you'll feel it differently. That quiet rhythm beneath modern life, that ancient pattern still present inside your body. If you enjoy these slow journeys into the past, where history is not rushed but experienced, then consider subscribing to The Sleeping Historian. Because here, we don't just tell history, we let you rest inside it. Sleep well, and I'll see you in the next story.